In this lecture, we are going to update the PHP render function for the authentication modal block. We've repeated this step numerous times. We are always going to be using output buffers for rendering a block on the server. I think it would be a good idea to create a code snippet to expedite this process. Let's get started. In your editor, open the authenticationmodal.php file. Inside this function, we are going to quickly create the output buffer. Let's call the obstart function to open the buffer. Next, add closing and opening PHP tags. Afterward, create a variable called output. The value for this variable will be the return value of the obgetContents function. Let's close the buffer by using the obEndClean function. Lastly, let's return the output variable. This is the standard setup for adding buffers. It's not going to change for the rest of this course. Repeatedly writing these lines of code can feel monotonous. Let's convert these lines into a snippet. Select the inner contents of the function, but do not select the function itself. During the selection, include the indentation for the first line. Otherwise, it will not be included. Next, under the View menu, select the Command Palette option. Search for a command called Generate Snippet. For the name of snippet, let's call it Block Output Buffer. The Scope option can be left empty. We do not need it. Next, we can add a prefix. Let's set the prefix to Block Output Buffer. Lastly, we can give a description. Set the description to the following: adds an output buffer for blocks. After entering our options, the snippet should have been generated. Let's add our snippet to Visual Studio Code. Under the File menu, navigate to Preferences, User Snippets. Visual Studio Code will ask for a specific file type. Our snippet is written with PHP. Let's select PHP from the list. Inside the JSON object, paste the snippet at the bottom. After adding the snippet, we can begin using it immediately. Let's try testing our snippet. Back inside the PHP file, let's remove the inner contents of the function. Next, let's begin typing our prefix. As we do so, the option for adding the snippet will become available. If we select this snippet, the file will be pre-filled with our code. Awesome! Snippets can work for any language. We're not restricted to a specific file type. The final step for our function is to add the template. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the template. From this gist, copy the template to your clipboard. Next, head back to the editor. Inside the buffer zone, let's insert the template. The template is very large. You'll be able to view the design after we've refreshed the page in the browser. Before we do, let's conditionally render the registration form. As a reminder, we provided the option for disabling the registration form. At the top of the function, let's grab the attributes by adding the attributes argument. Next, we are going to disable the link for the registration form. As you'll soon see, the forms are wrapped with tabs. Visitors will be able to switch between forms. You must conditionally render the tab for the registration form. You can find the tab by searching for a comment that says Register tab. Under this comment, we are going to find a list item element. This element should be conditionally rendered. Above the comment, enter PHP mode. Next, add an if statement. Inside the condition of the if statement, we are going to check if the showRegister attribute is true. Inside the block of code, add closing and opening PHP tags. Lastly, let's move the list item element inside the conditional block. We've taken care of the tab. However, the form will continue to appear. The form should be conditionally rendered too. Inside the template, you can find the form by searching for an HTML comment that says Register Form. Below this comment, there is a form element. This entire element should be conditionally rendered. The process is going to be exactly the same as before. Enter PHP mode above the comment. Add an if statement with the showRegister attribute as the condition. Insert closing and opening tags. Lastly, move the form into the conditional block. After making those changes, we can finally test our block. In your browser, refresh the experimental page. Initially, the authentication modal block will not be visible. By default, I've hidden the modal with CSS. We can temporarily view the modal by modifying the CSS. In the Developer Tools, open the Elements panel. Search for an element with a class called WP Block Udemy Plus Auth Modal. On the sidebar, search for the styles that we've applied to this element. There are a few properties. However, the property we care about is the display property. Let's disable this property from the element. After doing so, the modal should appear on the page. You should be presented with the same UI element as me. Perfect. By default, the registration form should appear. If it isn't, double-check the settings for the block. You may have accidentally disabled it. After verifying the block has been added, we can start to work on the forms. In the next lecture, we are going to begin with the registration form.